ABC News poll, half of those polled disapprove of how President Trump handled his summit with Vladimir Putin last week. 33% approve, 1 in 3. And 56% say they disapprove of President Trump's expressing doubt about U.S. intelligence agencies' collusion that Russia tried to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. 29% say they approve. So, John Heilman, those are fairly low numbers. Only 29% approve of his questioning the U.S. intel community. That's pretty good. And only 1/3 approve of his performance in Helsinki. Maybe there is hope yet that this president's not going to be allowed to adopt Soviet-era style attitudes towards NATO.
Yeah, that's not the Republican base there, though, Joe. That's the irreducible Trump base, basically, that's approving of his performance in Helsinki and of his attacks on the intelligence community. I will say that, you made a reference earlier in the show to the fact that we pay attention to the Trump base. We should pay attention to the Trump base and the Trump voters. And I agree with you. We should. But over the weekend, I think your friend Nate Silver tweeted something out or said something somewhere that I read about how he's old enough to remember an election cycle when all we talked about was independent voters. That's all we focused on. Swing voters, independent voters, what the independent voter was thinking. I believe that election cycle was 2016. And now, not even 2 years later, all we talk about is the Trump voter, the Trump base. How solid is it? What are the Trump voters thinking? Again, with no disrespect to them and with a clear eye of any political scientist or political analyst has to pay attention to that. It is weird that we are not paying more attention to the majority of Americans who do disapprove of this president, do disapprove of his behavior on the world stage, and importantly, those voters in the middle of the electorate, independent voters, who are going to make the difference this November, not the Trump base.
Well, yeah, and I agree with my good friend Nate Silver. Thank you for, identifying him properly. But I identify with my good friend Nate Silver that Donald Trump, and I've talked about it, there's 33%. I mean, he on this issue, he's got 1 out of 3 voters. He's got the Trump base. Even in his best days, he's still in the minority. He's got 40%. Whenever people talk to me about how the world's coming to an end and, we won't survive this. I know, Joe, you say we're always going to survive, but we won't survive this. Yes, we will. Donald Trump is, on his better days, a 40% president. On days like today, on this issue, he's got 1 out of 3. That's still the minority of voters in America. And Mike Barnicle, as bleak as things seem when Donald Trump goes off the cliff and again adopts the foreign policy of Soviet KGB spies towards NATO, you can bet that the majority of Americans are going to keep their heads, punish him, and punish those who are covering up for him and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Joe, I agree with you. We are going to survive this. And I also agree, oddly enough, with John Heilman, who raised an important point. I think
a rarity. Holy moly, what happened?
I know. Well, it's Monday morning.
Somebody spiked your coffee this morning?
I'm tired.
Mellow.
But an Irish coffee this morning. Irish coffee.
There is, I think, oddly enough, a new silent majority out there. And it is people in the middle, in this country, sitting there observing everything every day, what we say on these shows, what they hear, what they read. And I don't think they're going anywhere near Donald Trump right now. They're just sitting there. They're the deciders. And Walter, you live in the country. You live in New Orleans.
I think the issue of a new silent majority is a fascinating one because I was just out in California, in the West, down in Louisiana. You do see this growing thing. It hasn't been tapped into as sort of like, hey, we're more sensible in this country. I was wondering who could possibly harness that, because you got to figure out what type of midterm candidates and what type of presidential candidates could harness this sort of new silent majority you talk about.
Well, and Mike, I've been to Middle America. I've been off the beaten path. I went to Sconset last week. I rode out to the lighthouse. Wow. I have been to where the heart of America beats the strongest. No, but in Northwest Florida, it's very interesting. A lot of people I've talked to actually that voted for Donald Trump. And of course, if Donald Trump were lucky enough to draw Hillary Clinton again, which he won't, they would vote for Donald Trump again. They're not going to do anything that they think helps the media, or helps Nancy Pelosi, or helps fill in the blank. At the same time, there is a sense of exhaustion.
Yes.
Which is he's making me so tired. Even in red state America, where I was born and raised, I talk to my friends, they're just exhausted by it all. And there's not going to be, I mean, it's not going to be as simple as Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump versus the editorial page of the New York Times, Donald Trump versus MSNBC. You know, it never works out that way in politics. It's just things are going to be much more difficult for him this fall.
So, Joe,
Go
let me
ahead.
ask you just a quick question as a political strategist, right? If that's right, if there's a big silent majority, there's also a big animated Democratic base that hates Donald Trump, right? So we're headed into the midterm elections, and you're now the chief strategist for the DCCC or the DSCC. How do you deal with the strategic conundrum of I gotta get the base out if we're going to win this, if we're going to take back control of either house of Congress, but I also really want to appeal to the silent majority because there's a lot more of them than there are people who are in the Democratic base on the left. That seems to me to be a real fundamental strategic challenge. Go. What's the solution?
Well, you talked about my good friend Nate Silver. And he is, thank you for identifying Nate as my good friend, he is. But Nate Silver's website, 538, had a fascinating article a couple of weeks ago where they found the one district in America, or maybe it was the one county in America, that Barack Obama won by 20 points and that Donald Trump won by 20 points.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was in Iowa. Biggest swing in America. What were the three issues? One, money in politics. Two, health care. And I'm sorry, right now, three is escaping me. I think it was tax loopholes. It's very simple. You win this election if you're a Democrat, like parties out of power have always won elections. You talk about corruption in the Trump administration, that's really easy. When you look at the list of cabinet agencies that have been run by corrupt people who have already been kicked out of office, that's number one. Number two, you talk about health care. Donald Trump promised you and me and your children and my children better health care coverage that was going to be cheaper, that was going to be more exclusive. Now they're trying to take away pre-existing condition coverage, and they haven't replaced health care. Health care is much worse today, much more expensive than it was before, and it's only going to get worse between now and the election. So you've got corruption, one. Number two, you talk about health care. And number three, loopholes. The most damning thing that I would put if I were running against a Republican that voted for Trump's tax cuts, I would get his exact verbatim. From the night after he signed the tax cuts, he flew down in a 757 jet, went down to Mar-a-Lago, got off the plane, went to Mar-a-Lago, and he was surrounded by billionaires. And what did he say to those billionaires? I just made you a lot of money today. He signed tax cuts for his billionaire friends. You put those three things together, nobody's going to be talking about Russia. Nobody's going to be talking about the economy. They're going to be going after Donald Trump's corrupt Republican Party. How's that work for you?
Sounds pretty good to me.
Sounds like a great stump.
Maybe
speech.
hey, if there's a job opening at the DCCC, I think you're ready to take it.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Again,
He's a
I'm
small
going to stay
country
right
lawyer,
here in the
man.
heart of. I'm a dumb country lawyer. I'm going to stay right here in the heart of America. Coming up next, we're going to bring in USA Today's Susan Page, the editor-in-chief of Politico magazine, whose new piece is titled "Why I Am No Longer a Russiagate Skeptic." Fascinating article. We'll bring it to you when we return. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.